Okay, so you want to own a skyscraper in New York. You've seen the skyline. Maybe from a rooftop bar in Brooklyn, maybe from a plane banking into JFK, those glass towers catching the last of the sunlight like they own the city. Which, technically, someone does. And that someone, you've decided, could be you. You buy the building, you put your name on the lobby in brushed steel letters. Tenants pay you rent every month. The city keeps running, the money keeps coming in. You keep the tower. That fantasy is not entirely wrong, but it is missing about 90% of the reality. Here is what actually happens. Owning a skyscraper in New York is not really a real estate investment. It is a high-stakes operating business that happens to be housed in a building. The building is not the product. The building is the liability. What you're actually selling is something far more fragile and far more complicated. And understanding that distinction is the only way to understand why some of New York's most iconic towers are quietly turning into financial catastrophes while others are minting money, and why the line between those two outcomes is thinner than you'd ever expect from the outside. Let's start from the beginning. Building a skyscraper in New York is, by any reasonable measure, the most expensive construction project a human being can undertake on this planet. The 2024 Turner & Townsend International Construction Cost Survey confirmed what anyone who has tried to build anything in Manhattan already knows. New York has the highest high-rise construction costs in the world. Not just in the United States, in the world. 30% higher than London, 40% higher than Los Angeles. More than double what the same building would cost in Houston, Toronto, or Amsterdam. Let's put some numbers on that. A mid-sized Class A office skyscraper in Manhattan, call it around 1 million square feet, roughly 40 to 50 stories, will run you somewhere between $1.5 and $2 billion to build from scratch. That's the all-in figure, land acquisition, which alone can cost between $250 million and $700 million depending on where in Manhattan you're looking. Hard construction costs running $400 to $500 million just for materials, labor running $200 to $600 million depending on complexity, and design fees, architect and engineering costs, adding another $60 to $100 million on top. And that's before you've filed a single permit. Now, if you're not building new but buying an existing tower, which is what most skyscraper owners actually do, you're looking at a different kind of math. Trophy Class A towers on Park Avenue or in Hudson Yards have traded in recent years at anywhere from $800 million to over $2 billion depending on occupancy, lease terms, and market conditions. The GM building at 767 Fifth Avenue has an assessed tax value approaching $2 billion. One Vanderbilt recently leased floors at $200 per square foot annually, implying a building value north of $3 billion. So pick your entry point. $1 billion on the low end, $2 to $3 billion for the real thing. Either way, welcome to the most expensive game in commercial real estate. But the cost of the building is not the hard part. Here's where most people's mental model of skyscraper ownership falls apart. They imagine a landlord sitting at the top of a tower collecting rent checks from hundreds of corporate tenants and spending most of the money on martinis. That is not how this works. Before you collect a single dollar of rent, before a single company even moves their furniture in, you will spend somewhere between $20 million and $50 million on licensing, permits, and regulatory approvals in New York City. Building permits. Environmental reviews. Department of Buildings inspections at every significant phase of construction. Zoning and air rights agreements. If the building is new construction, you may need to negotiate with the city's Landmarks Preservation Commission. If it involves underground work, you're dealing with MTA coordination for subway tunnels, fire department inspections, elevator certifications. New York requires mandatory third-party testing for every elevator in every high-rise, and a 50-story building might have 15 to 20 elevator banks. That's a dedicated inspection and certification cycle, just for the elevators. Then there's insurance. General liability for a New York skyscraper runs between $5 and $10 million per year. Property and casualty, on a $2 billion asset, add another $3 to $5 million. Workers' compensation during construction, given that New York union labor already runs $80 to $120 per hour, and the unionization rate in construction is nearly double the national average, can add tens of millions more to your pre-revenue burn rate. And then there's the financing cost. Almost no one builds or buys a skyscraper with cash. The typical capital stack involves somewhere between 50 and 70% debt. On a $1.5 billion acquisition, that could mean $900 million in loans. At current commercial real estate financing rates, which rose sharply from the cheap money era and have not meaningfully reversed, debt service on that loan runs somewhere between $50 and $75 million per year, every year, before a tenant signs a lease, before an elevator carries a single person to a floor, just to service the debt. That clock starts ticking the moment you close. So how does a skyscraper actually make money? It is not one thing. It is never one thing. There are layers. The first and largest layer is base rent. Manhattan office rents average somewhere between $60 and $100 per square foot per year, depending on building class and location. Trophy buildings, the ones with the dramatic lobbies, the panoramic views, the LEED Platinum certifications, routinely achieve $100 to $200 per square foot. One Vanderbilt and Hudson Yards properties have seen leases signed at $200 and above. For a 1 million square foot tower running at 95% occupancy and averaging $80 per square foot, that is $76 million in annual base rent. A strong year, a real number, but not the only number. The second layer is operating expense pass-throughs. In almost every commercial office lease in Manhattan, tenants pay their proportionate share of increases in the building's operating costs above a base year. As utilities rise, as insurance premiums increase, as compliance costs go up, those costs get billed back to tenants on top of their base rent. For a large building, these escalation billings can add another $8 to $15 per square foot across the occupied floors, meaning another $8 to $15 million per year from a 1 million square foot building, flowing from tenants to owner. The third layer is parking and retail. Most Manhattan skyscrapers have some combination of below-grade parking or street-level retail, and these are priced separately from the office floors. Retail in prime Midtown Manhattan, think ground floor frontage on 6th Avenue or near Grand Central, rents for anywhere from $150 to $300 per square foot annually. A 10,000 square foot retail tenant at $200 per square foot adds another $2 million per year. Parking, where it exists, generates additional revenue at rates that can reach $500 to $750 per month per space. The fourth layer is what the industry calls ancillary income: building signage rights, antenna and telecom equipment licenses on the roof, event space rental in lobby atriums, and in newer trophy towers, observation deck revenue. The Empire State Building generated approximately $125 million in total revenue in 2019, and a substantial portion of that came from the observation deck alone, not rent. That single revenue line changed the entire economics of the building. Put it all together. A well-occupied million-square-foot trophy tower in a good year might generate somewhere between $90 million and $130 million in total annual revenue from all sources combined. That sounds like a lot. Hold that number, because now comes the part nobody talks about at the cocktail party, where someone brags about owning a building. Operating a New York skyscraper costs an extraordinary amount of money just to stay alive. Building staff alone, the doormen, the security guards, the cleaning crews, the building engineers who manage the HVAC and mechanical systems, the property managers, the superintendent teams, runs roughly 12 to 15% of gross annual revenue for a large commercial tower. On a building pulling in $100 million in revenue, that's $12 to $15 million per year just in payroll and staff-related costs. Utilities are the next shock. A 1 million square foot office building in New York consumes somewhere between $8 and $15 million in electricity annually. New York's commercial electric rates are among the highest in the country, over 23 cents per kilowatt hour in some demand tiers as of recent Con Edison rate schedules. And a building that runs 24 hours a day to service global banking clients, law firms, and trading floors doesn't get to turn off the air conditioning at 6 p.m. Add water, gas, and cooling system charges, and you're at $10 to $18 million annually in utilities alone. Maintenance and capital repairs on a large high-rise run another $2 to $3 per square foot annually, meaning another $2 to $3 million per year for ongoing repairs, plus a mandatory reserve for major capital projects. Elevator modernizations, facade replacements, roof work, mechanical system overhauls. These are not optional. The New York City Department of Buildings requires periodic facade inspections under Local Law 11, and failure to maintain the exterior of a high-rise can result in mandatory sidewalk sheds that wrap the base of the building for months or years, killing ground floor retail and creating a reputational disaster. And then there is the single largest operating cost of all, property taxes. New York City taxes commercial office buildings with a ferocity that is genuinely difficult to believe until you see the bills. Commercial properties in New York, which is tax class 4, are taxed at roughly 10.5% of their assessed value annually. And assessed value is not set by what you paid for the building. It is set by what the city's Department of Finance says it's worth, based on its income-generating potential. For the 50 most taxed office buildings in New York, the combined annual property tax levy runs into the billions. The GM building at 767 Fifth Avenue pays roughly $75 million in property taxes per year. The MetLife building at 200 Park Avenue, $60 million per year. These are annual figures, not one-time fees, every year. For a typical Class A tower of around 1 million square feet, annual property taxes run approximately $14 to $15 per square foot, or roughly $14 to $15 million annually for the entire building. That single line item often represents 10 to 15% of total revenue. Add it all up. Staff at $12 million, utilities at $14 million, maintenance and reserves at $3 million, insurance at $8 million, property taxes at $15 million, management fees at $3 to $4 million, and you are looking at operating expenses of $55 to $60 million per year just to keep the building running, before you've touched the debt service, which, remember, runs $50 to $75 million per year. So in a fully occupied, well-managed trophy tower generating $100 million in revenue, with $60 million in operating expenses and $60 million in debt service, your net cash flow after all costs runs somewhere between negative $20 million and positive $20 million. In a good year, in a building that's nearly full, the margins are not what you imagine them to be. But here is the structural vulnerability that turns a tight margin into a catastrophe. And this is the mechanism that no one explains clearly enough. It is called the debt covenant and the lease roll. Almost every commercial mortgage on a major New York building includes what is called a debt service coverage ratio requirement, typically 1.2 to 1.5, meaning the building's net operating income must be at least 1.2 to 1.5 times the annual debt service payment. Fall below that and the lender can declare a technical default even if you haven't missed a single payment, which means the lender can demand immediate repayment, forcing a refinancing or a sale, often at the worst possible moment. Now layer in lease rolls. Commercial office leases are typically signed for 5, 10, or even 15 years. This creates a cliff structure in the owner's revenue. When a major anchor tenant, say, a law firm occupying 100,000 square feet, paying $8 million a year in base rent, decides not to renew at the end of their lease, your net operating income drops $8 million overnight. If that drop is large enough to push your D-score below the covenant threshold, you're not just losing revenue, you're in technical default on your loan. And here's what makes this especially dangerous in the current market. Tenant lease renewals are negotiated years in advance. But a building owner who financed at low rates in 2018 or 2019, with a major lease expiring in 2024 or 2025, now faces two simultaneous crises: renewing at potentially lower or uncertain occupancy in a market where vacancy rates exceeded 20%, while simultaneously refinancing their loan at interest rates that are 60 to 100% higher than when the original loan was made. The debt service coverage math breaks fast. This is not a hypothetical. It is what destroyed hundreds of millions of dollars of value across Manhattan in the past 3 years. In December 2018, Related Fund Management, an affiliate of one of New York's most respected real estate firms, purchased a 10-story office building at 321 West 44th Street in Hell's Kitchen for approximately $153 million. The building had 220,000 square feet of space and was considered a reasonable acquisition in a hot market. Then COVID happened. Office tenants vacated or downsized. Asking rents in Manhattan fell. Vacancy across the borough climbed past 20%. The building sat, partially empty, with a loan balance of more than $100 million. Related could not refinance at acceptable terms. The math simply did not work. By June 2024, the building sold in a short sale, meaning it sold for less than the outstanding loan balance, for under $50 million. That's a 67% decline in asset value from the 2018 purchase price. Lenders, including the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, agreed to take less than what they were owed just to exit the position. The loan was above $100 million. The sale price was under $50 million. The shortfall, the gap between what was owed and what was recovered, exceeded $50 million. And this was not an anomaly. One study found that 25 million square feet of office space across the United States entered financial distress in 2024 alone, a 39% spike from prior averages. In New York specifically, the delinquency rate on Manhattan office loans went from less than 1% in January 2023 to over 6% by January 2024. 6% doesn't sound dramatic until you do the math on what 6% of the Manhattan commercial loan book actually represents in dollar terms. The 321 West 44th story is not a story about bad luck or a single market event. It is what happens when a fixed cost machine, a building with fixed debt service, fixed operating costs, and fixed obligations, meets a revenue decline it cannot absorb. Let's walk through what that looks like in numbers. Take a hypothetical 1 million square foot Class A office skyscraper. Conservative but real-world assumptions. In the good year, occupancy runs at 95%. Average rent across occupied floors comes in at $80 per square foot. Operating expense pass-throughs from tenants add another $10 per square foot on average. Retail generates $2 million. Ancillary income, signage, telecom, parking, adds $3 million. Total revenue, approximately $92 million. Operating expenses, staff at $12 million, utilities at $14 million, maintenance and reserves at $3 million, insurance at $8 million, property taxes at $15 million, management fees and miscellaneous at $4 million. Total operating costs, $56 million. Net operating income, $36 million. Debt service on a $900 million loan at 6%, $54 million. Annual cash flow, negative $18 million. But the DSKR sits at about 0.67, technically in default territory, unless the owner has other cash to cover the shortfall. This is actually not the disaster scenario. This is the cost of financing a trophy asset in the current rate environment. Now the bad year. A major anchor tenant, occupying 150,000 square feet, declines to renew when their lease expires. Occupancy drops to 80%. Market conditions mean the vacant floors rent slowly, so you're absorbing a full year of lost income. Average effective rent on remaining tenants drops to $72 per square foot as you offer concessions to retain others who are also shopping the submarket. Operating expense pass-throughs fall proportionally. Retail holds, ancillary income holds. Total revenue, approximately $59 million. Operating costs do not drop. Fixed costs, property taxes, debt service, insurance, building staff remain almost entirely unchanged whether your building is 80% full or 95% full. Total operating costs, $53 million. Debt service, $54 million. Total outflows, $107 million. Revenue, $59 million. Net annual cash loss, negative $48 million. The difference between the good year and the bad year, $66 million. $66 million is the gap between a building that is financially strained but survivable and a building that is in free fall. So why do sophisticated investors, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, the Durst Organization, Brookfield, SL Green, still buy these assets? Because a skyscraper in New York is not primarily a cash flow investment, not at the top tier anyway. The first reason is appreciation. Manhattan real estate has, over most 30-year windows, appreciated in value far faster than inflation. A building bought for $200 million in 1990 is worth far more today. The operating losses in any given year can be offset, on paper and in many cases in reality, by the long-run capital gain. The second reason is tax strategy. Large commercial real estate assets qualify for significant federal depreciation deductions through a mechanism called cost segregation analysis. Owners can accelerate depreciation on building components, mechanical systems, elevators, building technology, to create paper losses that offset income from other sources. For a wealthy investor with significant taxable income elsewhere, owning a money-losing building in New York can be, paradoxically, financially rational. The third reason is scarcity and market position. There are only a finite number of full city block development sites in Manhattan. Once a major tower is built, it is essentially impossible to replicate it. Anchor tenants, major law firms, investment banks, financial institutions pay premium rents to be in particular addresses. One Vanderbilt isn't just a building. It is a claim on a specific kind of tenant who will pay whatever it takes to be there. That scarcity has real value that doesn't show up on the monthly cash flow statement. And the fourth reason, which nobody says out loud but everyone understands, is that owning a New York skyscraper does something to your position in the world that no amount of stock portfolio can replicate. The building is not just an asset, it is a statement, which brings us back to the reframe. A skyscraper in New York does not sell square footage. That's not what it is. What it actually sells is permanence. The promise that in a city defined by constant reinvention and relentless uncertainty, this particular address will endure. The tenants who pay $200 a square foot for floors in Hudson Yards or One Vanderbilt are not paying for floor space. They could rent floor space in New Jersey for $15 a square foot. They are paying for the signal the address sends to their clients, their employees, their rivals. They are paying to be made of the same material as the skyline itself. And the tragedy hidden inside that reframe is this: the more powerful the signal, the more expensive the machine that creates it becomes. The lobby that impresses the clients costs millions to build and millions more to maintain. The views require engineering that adds hundreds of millions to the construction cost. The LEED Platinum certification requires a 4.6 megawatt on-site power plant. The address itself requires a property tax bill that alone exceeds what most businesses generate in total revenue. A skyscraper is a machine for manufacturing permanence in a city that offers none. And like every machine of that ambition, it is expensive to build, expensive to maintain, and vulnerable to a single thing most people would never think to worry about: the day your biggest tenant decides to work from somewhere else. The glass goes all the way to the sky, but the foundation is made of leases.